We moved from the United States to Canada in 2018. My husband, my mother who has Alzheimer's, my 3 sons, David who was 23, Leo who was 12, and Ethan who was 10, myself and our 4 cats. We were living out of suitcases, renting Airbnbs week by week in East Gwillimbury, north of Toronto, while searching for a permanent home. One of those rentals felt wrong from the moment we opened the door. As soon as I stepped into one of the bedrooms, a chill ran straight through me. I tried to tell myself it was nothing. That evening, the boys were playing PlayStation in the living room when a framed art print fell off the wall by itself. We put it back. Our family has always been aware of the paranormal, so strange little things don't shock us, but this was only the beginning. At 2 in the morning, my husband and I told the kids good night and went to bed in the room where I had felt the cold. He sat down on the mattress and immediately started shivering. "Look at me," he said, "I'm freezing." Before I could answer, his voice changed, a deep, distorted, almost mechanical sound. I grabbed my phone and began praying a powerful prayer I knew. Whatever was inside my husband prayed back at me, but backwards. I called my kids, but at first they couldn't hear me. I gathered all my strength and called again. This time, David ran in and opened the door. My husband's face was pale and his muscles were swollen, transformed. The cats clawed at my younger boy's feet, pushing them into the room. David asked what he could do. "Pray and help me find the holy water," I told him. I was shaking like never before in my life. Leo was jumping up and down in panic. Ethan started shouting at the thing, telling it to leave his father alone. I sent the kids to get my mother's rosary. I tried everything that came to mind. The holy water didn't seem to do much. The rosary burned a little, but the prayers weren't working. I told Leo to do Reiki on his father, but he was terrified to go near. My husband reached his hand out as if calling him, but Leo stayed back. Suddenly, my husband said he felt better. He stood up and went into the hallway bathroom to splash water on his face. Then I saw his expression in the mirror and thought, "Oh no, the mirror." I told the kids, "Get him out of there." He grinned strangely. My boys pulled him out. We went outside the house. My husband said, "Please, let's pray." We all held hands and started praying. He shook and my oldest whispered, "Mom, that's not Dad." My husband laughed and said, "Do you really think you're going to get me out with little prayers?" We dragged the mattress from the room to the living room floor and made him lie down. I started doing Reiki and said, "Vayan todos por la luz." All of you, go toward the light. My husband shook violently and levitated. My kids were so frightened I had to pull him back to the floor. He said he felt better after the light prayer. I called my father to ask him to pray for us, but something kept interfering. I called my husband's sister. She told me to take him to a hospital. The next morning, my husband was outside smoking when I joined him. He said, "We were waiting for you." I asked, "Who is we?" And he began to stutter. A putrid smell, like rotten fish, hung in the air. We left the house that morning for another Airbnb, but the thing still followed. I could feel it coming, and when I did, I would run to my husband's side and tell him to be strong and fight it. Eventually, we got a house and called the church for help. The priest was so terrified, he said he would bless the house from outside, but would not set foot in it. He asked many questions and told us they would call us to do an exorcism, but they never did. In the end, we ended up getting help from a couple I found on Reddit. They never charged us. After that, we began to get better. We never expected to go through something like this. It's something you can't tell just anyone, but it happened to us. This happened about 10 years ago, where I lived at a huge house, which we got for pretty cheap. I believe around 30,000 Jamaican dollars, or less than 300 US dollars. We thought we had hit a gold mine. It had enough rooms for our entire family, and we even had roof access, which was rare in Jamaica. Anyways, onto the weird stuff. It started with my baby brother. When we moved in, he immediately got sick. It's a common theme when ghosts interact with children. We didn't think anything of it at first, and days passed. Then one night while I was asleep, I was awoken by screaming, both my aunt and my mom yelling various Bible scriptures and verses. I rebuke you in the name of Jesus, among others. I won't lie, I was pretty scared, so I just laid there in bed, quivering in the sheets until I eventually fell asleep. The next day, I heard my mom telling my grandma what had happened. She also started calling other members of the family to tell them what happened. She said that there was a large shadow. It was humanoid in appearance, like what your shadow would look like standing upright. It was seemingly trying to pick my little brother up out of the crib. My aunt saw it first, then called my mom. Jamaica is known for paranormal experiences, the main reason being all the slavery and wars that were fought here, so most people should at least have some sort of experience, especially the elders who grew up in the mostly country area. So they suggested that we use frankincense. Usually people burn it before they move in, as it is said to be able to clear negative energy and evil. Fast forward 2 days. I bought some goldfish in a bag on my way home from school. I decided that upstairs would be a good place to keep them, and I made a makeshift tank for them. But as I walked into the upstairs room, I saw someone sitting in a chair in the corner of my eye. I turned and looked. It was a male, fair skin color, but he seemed like he was tortured. Busted face, mouth wide open, and bleeding on the floor, both through his mouth and body. He was sitting laid back on the chair and staring at me. I slowly turned away in disbelief, and when I turned back around, there was nothing there. The chair did not even exist. I went and told my younger brother, and he said he also had a freaky experience. He said some nights when he would try to go to sleep, he felt like someone was squeezing his head together to the point where he would cry and would not be able to move. It got so bad he would try not to sleep at night. Needless to say, I was freaked out beyond words, because as of now, as far as I was concerned, we needed to get out of this house. It's one thing just seeing freaky stuff, but when that freaky stuff starts interacting with you, that's a no-no. So I asked my parents if we could move, because they had also had their own experiences. But we had just moved in, so we had to stay there a little while longer because we needed to find somewhere else to live, and money doesn't grow on trees, especially in Jamaica. We ended up staying for a couple of months before leaving. But to conclude, if something is too good to be true, it probably is. It was a good-looking house, but we later found out the previous residents had issues with it, and apparently, someone had been murdered in that house. I have always believed in the paranormal and grew up hearing and seeing things in my house. I'm from Northford, Connecticut, so as you can imagine, the entire state is pretty haunted. I have heard everything from the house settling to glass breaking. To my shock, no glass would be shattered on the floor. When I was 12, back in 2010, my mom and dad split up, so I would go visit my mom on the weekends and be with my dad during the week. My mom found a nice house in East Haven, Connecticut that sat on a hill with a road leading up the hill. On top was a farm with horses. My mom loves horses, so she jumped on the offer. I was a little brat when I was 12, so I got expelled from school and was living with my mom and my older brother full time. I would stay up until the crack of dawn every night and sleep all day. I would always hear things like creaking steps, doors opening and closing, the usual things. One day, my mom had her boyfriend over. He was standing in the kitchen when he felt a tug at his shirt. He turned around and nothing was there. He left shortly after that. This one night I'm about to tell you about has shook me to this day, and it still remains a mystery. I'll give you a visual of the third floor of the house where my room was. When you open the front door to my old house, directly to your left is a staircase. You walk up the staircase, and on the second floor, the kitchen/living room area is directly on your left. As you keep walking up, there is a hallway that cuts to the right. At the end of the hallway is a bathroom, dead ahead. My room is on the right as you're walking down the hallway, right next to the bathroom. One night, my mom, my brother, 2 cousins, and my aunt went out to dinner. I just wanted to stay home and play video games. My dog Sydney was in my room, keeping me company. She was a small Yorkie. As I was playing, I suddenly had to go to the bathroom, so I waited until my game was over. When my game was over, I got up and ran to the bathroom. My dog followed me. I finished, flushed the toilet, washed my hands. As soon, and I mean as soon as I cut the water off and was drying my hands, I heard creaking up the stairs. It sounded like someone was walking. I froze, not knowing who it was or what to do. I was home alone. I sat there for another second. The footsteps up the stairs stopped. A few seconds went by, which felt like forever. And then, just like before, I heard a footstep reach the top step, the hallway. I didn't hesitate. I picked up my dog and ran to my room and locked the door. I sat back down in my chair in front of my TV and just listened. More footsteps, but this time coming down the hallway towards my room. I heard the footsteps creak all the way until it got to my door, and then it suddenly stopped. I was frozen with fear. A few more seconds go by, and then knock, knock, knock. I immediately called my mom to see if she was home yet, and of course I heard no answer. After the 3 knocks, I heard nothing. No more footsteps, nothing. I waited until I finally heard the front door open and burst out of my room relieved. I told my mom what had happened, for her to tell me countless other stories of experiences she had in that house. This happened back when I was 12 years old in my hometown in Malaysia. It was school holidays. My parents had decided our family would be staying at our grandparents' house for a week. My grandparents' house is located 40 minutes away from the city. It is built in a small town in a rural suburb, consists of 3 other neighbors living close by. The nearest town from their house is another 10 minutes drive out of the dense tropical environment, which also means the entire suburb will be pitch black after the sun sets between 5:30 to 6 p.m. The best thing about this time of the hour is the quiet and peacefulness of the atmosphere, combined with the faint noise of crickets in the background while I get myself lost gazing at the starry skies surrounding the full moon. There's 4 rooms in my grandparents' house: the maid's room, grandparents' room, great-grandma's room, and my parents' room. My great-grandmother was 97 at that time, so she moved to the city with my uncle, who had 3 maids to take care of her. This means my younger brother Andy would be staying with me in great-grandmother's room, since we don't want to share a room with our parents. Everything went well until our second to last day. My parents attended a friend's wedding in the city, so they wouldn't be coming home. It was already 9:30 p.m. My grandparents and the maid had already gone to bed. Only Andy and I were hanging out in the living room. He was playing his Game Boy Color in front of the TV, while I was reading comic books at the very back of the room, with the windows slightly open to enjoy the cool breeze. All of a sudden, I could feel a distinct change in motion of the breeze. It no longer felt the same cool inward flow, but rather like a very cold hand gently brushing up and down my neck to the top of my head. My entire body instantly reacted with goosebumps, those kind of goosebumps where you know something isn't right. I tried to play it cool and not freak out, pretend to not notice anything for another 5 minutes or so. My dad once told me that if you show fear, it will notice and continue to bother you. The brushing continued as I endured, and trust me, that was the longest minutes of my life. I slowly stood up, didn't turn my back to look behind, shook off my goosebump and said, "Andy, let's go to bed." He instantly agreed, not because he noticed, but he was always afraid to be alone downstairs. We went upstairs, brushed our teeth, and then it was lights out. I remember waking up very suddenly from my sleep, feeling wide awake for no apparent reason. I couldn't see very well as it was still dark, around 3 a.m. While trying to go back to sleep, I heard a very faint meowing sound in the room, and I could instantly tell the difference. It wasn't from a cat, but man-made, from a female. Confused, I quickly turned to Andy to find him facing me, sound asleep. The meowing gradually grew louder, and its tone became much sinister until it was next to my ear. My mind remained calm, however my eyes began tearing up, and my entire body was shaking in absolute horror, which I no longer had control over. It was as if I were completely paralyzed. Minutes felt like hours, till my body finally calmed down and the feeling of dread and horror slowly lingered away. I could feel an internal calm in the room. However, I couldn't bring myself back to sleep after what happened. To feel safe, I sat upright and positioned my back against the corner of the wall while watching Andy sleep peacefully until morning. When first light entered the room, I immediately woke Andy up to get him out of the room with me. Although I received a couple of grouchy punches and kicks, it was worth it, as I don't feel safe for him to be in there alone. I didn't want to worry the whole family while seeking for an answer, so I approached my maid and I told her, no matter what, don't share with anyone what I'm about to tell you. Feeling excited, she hurried her promise and I told her what happened. Her expression immediately turned sour and she hesitated to explain. However, I begged her because I really needed the closure. Eventually, she caved and appeared regretful for telling me. The culprit was a Pontianak, a female vampiric ghost in Malay mythology who prey on men. Pontianak usually arise at full moon and announce their presence through high-pitched cries. If the cry is soft, it means that the Pontianak is near, and if it is loud, then she must be far. I almost fainted right after hearing it. To this day, I still get goosebumps every time I retell this horrific experience. I moved to France over 20 years ago. My husband and I bought an old maison bourgeoisie, which was built in 1789. I've always been curious about the paranormal and have had some strange things occur in my life, but nothing prepared me for living in this house. It is a large house, over 800 square meters, with a hectare of land. It has 3 stories, front and back staircases, and when you're in the front part of the house, you cannot hear anything that is going on in the back part of the house. The house needed a lot of work, but in the beginning, we just did some basic remodeling and updating. Shortly after we moved in, my daughter was born. We had invited quite a few out-of-town guests for her christening. My best friend was sleeping in a room we were using as a guest room. She is pretty pragmatic and not really a believer in the supernatural. She was awoken by a sharp punch to her stomach. She said it was so forceful that she was actually lifted off the bed. My husband laughed and said that it must have been a nightmare, but this made me feel very uneasy. Already, I had experienced weird sensations and heard footsteps in the hallway. I had kept those feelings to myself. I decided to share my thoughts with my best friend. She was very unsettled by the whole episode and was reluctant to spend another night in the room. The next night, she was again hit in the stomach, although not as violently. At this point, we were both pretty freaked out about it. She left the next day to return home. Needless to say, she now definitely believes in the paranormal. This episode was just the beginning of the strange occurrences that happened periodically throughout my time living in this house. My husband traveled a lot for work, and I was often left alone with my 3 young children. Since this was the case, we put in an alarm that had motion detectors in several rooms that might be vulnerable to a break-in. One such room was the playroom. This room is adjacent to the guest room that my friend stayed in before. We used it as a guest room, but it had 2 doors, and you had to go through this room to get to the playroom. The alarm in the playroom seemed to go off quite a lot during the dead of night, around 2 to 3 in the morning. This in of itself was enough to scare me when I was alone. I would go begrudgingly into the playroom to see what set off the alarm, only to find nothing. Sometimes, one of the remote control cars would have moved, but basically nothing. We had the alarm company check it out, but they found nothing and said maybe a spider or an insect crawled in front of the motion detector. Overall, I had some pretty bad vibes in that room. One day, my son had a friend over. They were around 6 or 7, and they came to me running and acting a bit hysterical. They said they heard men talking in the room. I went in there to check it out and I heard men talking but very muffled. I looked out the window into our garden to see if perhaps it was the gardener, but no one was there. I could not find the source of the voices. They always seemed to be right next door, no matter what room in that wing of the house I was in. I didn't want to show my son and his friend that I was scared, so we left the room and I brought them to the kitchen. Of course, later, when I told this story to my husband, he said I had an overactive imagination and was influencing my son into thinking ghosts were in our house. Once after, I heard a man and a woman talking when I was in this room. It was late at night and I was tidying up after my kids. My husband was on a trip and I started to be frightened. I thought someone had broken in, but I also had a strange feeling that maybe it was something else. I called a good friend who came over with a baseball bat. She didn't hear anything, and all of the doors and windows were closed and locked. I was starting to feel like maybe my husband was right and I had an overactive imagination. This, however, was not the end of the voices, and later, several other people, many of them also skeptics, heard them. There are certainly parts of the house that see more activity than others, but the activity is not limited to the insides of the house. The front yard of the house is quite large with a circular driveway made of gravel. The whole property is enclosed by tall stone walls with a large gate, so it's not very easy to enter unless you go through the gate, which is always closed unless opened by an electronic opener. One day, when my oldest son was about 10 or so, we were playing around in the yard. He was running the circular driveway and I was timing him. Then I would run it and he would time me. About halfway through running a circuit, he came barreling towards me saying, "Mommy, why did you do that? You scared me." I had no idea what he was talking about. I said, "Do what? I've been here the whole time." He said someone was running right behind him and breathing down his neck and felt like they were going to push him. The gravel was even crunching. I immediately felt uneasy. I tried to reassure him, but I too had felt as if someone was walking behind me on the driveway on several occasions, only to turn around and find no one there. My daughter also had an experience walking from the front gate to the house one night. She said someone or something had pulled the scarf from her neck and threw it to the ground. She ran into the house hysterical, thinking someone had followed her inside the gate. We turned on the lights in the yard and my husband went to check it out, but nothing. My husband said it must have been a branch from a tree or a bush, but honestly, I think it was something else. What, I don't know, but it left me feeling very uneasy, and I didn't like to be out front by myself. Living in a house that is haunted is not at all like you see in the movies. Months would go by and there would be nothing out of the ordinary. There were times I would even start to believe that perhaps I did have an overactive imagination. However, when other people would share the same type of experience, it's hard to discount what you are experiencing. When we first moved into the house, we needed to do some basic updating. The electricity was very outdated. The electricians were up in the attic, doing some rewiring. Some wallpaper was peeling off a wall they were working on, and I decided to take it off. Underneath was a drawing in black charcoal of a very tall figure in a stovetop hat. Creepiest thing I ever saw. Definitely not a child's drawing. It made a real impression on me, but I put it out of my mind. Many years later, we were preparing to go on vacation. The car was loaded up and my husband asked my oldest son to go back inside the house to make sure all the lights were turned off. After about 5 minutes, he came racing out the front door, terrified. "There's a man in your room." My husband and I went inside and searched the house, but no one was there. My son later told us as he reached the landing in front of our bedroom, he saw movement in our room. He looked inside and saw a tall man dressed in black with a hat looking out the window. The man then started to approach him with his arm out. He ran out of there as fast as he could. The experience so affected him that he would not sleep by himself during our vacation. He was about 11 at that time. We talked about it quite a bit during the vacation. My youngest son, who was 4, said, "Mommy, a man comes to see me at night. He sits in the chair by my bed." I tried to talk about this with my husband because it seriously freaked me out, but once again he chalked it up to overactive imaginations. I never saw this man, but on numerous occasions whilst I was sleeping, I would wake up feeling panicked and have the sensation that someone was standing over me. I would burrow under the covers and pretend to still be sleeping. It made me feel like a child who is afraid to look under their bed or needs a nightlight. Who was this man that both of my sons claimed to see? Was he the man in the charcoal drawing on the attic wall? As I said before, I had heard voices in certain rooms of the house. They always seemed to be in the next room, but when I go to that room, they seem to be in another room. It always sounds like a muffled conversation. We remodeled our house, and after the work, I started to hear a woman humming. Always a cheerful tune, but not one that I knew. At times I really felt as if I was going crazy, but a friend of mine heard it as well. We were having coffee in my kitchen when I went to the restroom. My friend heard the humming and thought it was me. She started having a conversation with me, expecting me to be just outside of the kitchen door. Obviously, I didn't answer as I wasn't there. When I did come back, she told me about what happened. I had never told her about the humming lady. We both felt this was really strange, but oddly enough, we were not frightened. It just seemed that whatever was humming was not malevolent. My next experience was probably the scariest one I had had. Before we remodeled the house, we had a door in the kitchen that led to our yard. Our yard was full of very tall trees and was quite large. At nighttime it was very dark from all of the trees, and in winter months darkness fell quickly. Several times while in the kitchen alone at night, I would see what seemed to be quick movement by the door to the garden. Sometimes the dogs were outside, and I thought maybe it was them, but at other times there really was no explanation. Once I saw what appeared to be a very pale, gaunt face looking in. No body attached, just a face. But it was so fleeting, I could convince myself it was my imagination. One night my babysitter was in the kitchen with me helping to fix dinner. My two youngest were also in the kitchen. It was winter, so outside was pitch black. My daughter yelled, "Mommy, a man just stuck his head around the door." My babysitter quickly opened the door to look out, and there was no one there. A few minutes later, my son said, "There he is." We quickly looked, and we all saw a face looking in. I ran to the door, and my babysitter went outside with me. But there was no one there. I turned on the outside lights, and we couldn't see anyone. We were all a bit freaked out. The dogs started to bark, but I was too scared to put them outside. I didn't want anything to happen to them. I quickly checked the doors to make sure they were locked. What was it? I have no idea. A ghost? Or an intruder? If it was an intruder, I'm not sure how they would have gotten in our yard, as it is enclosed by very tall stone walls. Whatever it was disappeared without a trace. I never saw another face in the window after that. There weren't too many more specific events, but just the overall feeling of the house and weird things that would happen. I would often hear footsteps in the hall right outside my bedroom door. Each time I would think it was one of my children getting up in the middle of the night, only to find them fast asleep in their beds. Or objects that would be misplaced and turn up weeks later. Toys in the playroom that would move from one place to another. I often woke up in the middle of the night with the uneasy feeling that someone was in my room standing over my bed. I would break out in a cold sweat and pretend to be sleeping. On the third floor, which used to be the attic, I would feel cold pockets of air and just feel like I was not alone. Thankfully, I don't live in this house anymore.